So our speakers today for the extended panel discussion on the topic within and beyond the university experiences in alternative higher education are Mandel, Gunther Dietz, Tristan Mccowan, Diana de Paula Pellegrini, Elie Ghanem, Antônio Fernandes, Góes Neto, Gerardo López-Amaro, Teamey, Sônia Fátima, Schwendler, Aline Nunes dos Santos, Roxana P. Tumanov, and Francisco Duran del Fierro. And for the next 2.5 hours, they will be in conversation around the topic. So I, again, in the background, if there's any technical needs or comments in the chat that you would like to bring forth to the speakers, I'm here for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Greetings, everyone. Welcome. Bem-vindos, saludos, and aloha. My name is Mandel, originally from Brazil, but currently residing in the island of Hawaii. So I say aloha too as a greeting that's we've really grown to love in this part of the world, which is about love and care, but also about sharing the breath. So I just wanted to begin with sharing the breath. And even though we are separated by the screen right now, that we do share the same air which envelops us all. And I like to bring that into this digital space too. The air of the sea that we can smell here, and of the mountains and the volcano which made life possible in this place. And just as a visual reminder, you can see the fan behind me. So that's a way of acknowledging that there's constantly air between us all. So I'm really, really delighted, excited, really happy to, for us to be here in this Reimagining Education Conference, and especially also this session, in which I'm a co-author with Teamey here, my wife and partner, and Gerardo, and collaborating with Tristan and Gunther in also hosting and chairing this session. And I'm especially excited because as someone who's been involved in the Alliance from the beginning, in the Ecoversities Alliance, one of the key visions and orientations of the Alliance was to bring together different ontologies, different cosmologies, different ways of being, knowing, doing, and dwelling that have come from within the mainstream university, but also outside of mainstream universities, from social movements, indigenous knowledge, from ecological movements that were creating their own places of knowledge, production, and research. And so right from the first meeting we had as an alliance about 7 years ago, where we did bring together people who were inside the university and outside it, what was really the vision and what we kind of began to try and practice was how do we really dialogue across these different ontologies, or as we say in the article that we wrote, how do we do cosmopolitical learning? And so I'm really excited that we have now a panel in this conference, which is dealing exactly with this, about the multiple challenges of trying to bring about this kind of very needed forms of knowledge, creation, production, sharing, that does connect with other ways of being, knowing, doing, relating, that are very much needed in the present historical moment. And so I'm excited to kind of have you all here, all of you who are here in this in this panel. Thank you for being here. Also thank all the fellow authors of this really exciting journal publication. And I think Tristan, you're going to explain more the kind of format of the conversation, right? How we intend to do it. And we did say, I mean, I was seeing in the chat some about how long the session is going to be. We did put just a bracket, this time slot, for us to have more kind of open and in-depth conversations following the various short presentations from the authors, but it depends obviously on the interest of whoever is here in the room, you know, and also we can always take a break halfway through as well. So I think I'll pass it to you, Tristan, to introduce the journal and the session.
Thanks very much, Elie. It's great to be here. Gunther and I will say a few words about the special issue. Gunther, do you want to go first, or shall I? We have not coordinated beforehand, I'm afraid.
No, thanks, Tristan. Please start, and I will.
Okay.
Go on.
All right, great. Yeah, I'll just say a few words. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm now just thinking about air after Udi's comments. I'd never actually thought about that, but that is a really nice thing to remember when you're looking at your big screen or little screen. And it's fantastic to be part of this conference, but also to be together with the authors that we've worked with on this special issue for what's been more than a year from the start of when it was just a seed of an idea to seeing it out in digital print. So it's really lovely to gather some of our authors here together, and I think we have 6 of our articles represented here, and there are some others, and you can see it on the link. But also, of course, fantastic to have more of you here today to talk about it with us. And the people who wrote articles in our special issue obviously are just a small proportion of the people who are working on this theme academically, but also practically. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to do in this special issue, was to bring together people who are either working on this issue as researchers or practically working at the chalk face, or very often both. And quite often the articles are written by people who are actually spearheading some of these initiatives, but also reflecting on them. So the theme within or beyond the university, as Udi said, I think quite often there are discussions within higher education, but also more broadly in society, about whether to work inside or outside the system, as if it's a kind of an either or. And sometimes it might seem to us as an either or. Sometimes in our own lives we might make that decision, but I think ultimately it's both and together. And one of the things we wanted to look at in the special issue and talk about today is juxtaposition, bringing those things together, looking at experiences of challenging the nature of the university and higher education from within established universities, but also at the fringes in completely free and, relatively free and autonomous spaces. And the way that these interventions speak to each other, and what they can say to each other, and how they can inform each other, the interactions between them. So that's the idea of the special issue and what we're going to be looking at today. I don't need to tell you here today, because you're all working and interested in it. It's a theme in dire need of research, documenting all of the very important experiences that there are around the world, just in terms of raising awareness of all the fantastic initiatives there are, but also in-depth systematic research to try and understand the conditions of possibility within which these innovations are operating, and also to understand the challenges that these make to our conception of the university. And one of the things that we want to think about today is how do these challenges, these counter-hegemonic, these indigenous, these environmental, these other initiatives, how do they challenge what we think the university is, and the impact that might have more broadly on higher education. The special issue is in Educação Realidadeon, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a fantastic Brazilian journal in the field of educational research, a very well-established journal operating from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. And we're grateful to the editors for enabling us to bring together these articles. And also, I want to say particularly great that we could do this in a multilingual way. So we have English, Spanish, and Portuguese language articles here. There were other languages we might have liked to have got as well, but at least we managed 3 different languages, which was great. That also was one of the aims of this special issue, to try and bring experiences from different parts of the world and to put them in dialogue. There was a predominant American contribution. I think that's probably partly because of our own interests as editors, but also because Latin America is at the forefront of many of these innovations as well. But we also do have contributions from the UK and India, and it's really nice, and to bring those into dialogue as well. So I'm really excited to have a chance to revisit some of these ideas and to talk to bring the different authors in today into a dialogue, but also to open these ideas out to the many people who are gathered here today. And we're really interested in getting your take on these issues, your views on the ideas that we've been working with, and some other completely new ones that we didn't think of. So really great to be here. Thanks very much. I'll hand over now to Gunther for some introduction.
Thank you, Tristan, very much. And first of all, I would really like to thank Ecoversities Alliance to host this meeting as part of the Reimagining Education Conference. It's a great opportunity to get to know more or less directly through Zoom at least, and to exchange on these issues. I think our topic is so important in these terrible times, not only of epidemics, of wars, where we see that universities really are not succeeding in training the elites we need in the 21st century. We are being governed by elites who prefer to step back to 20th or maybe even 19th century ways of nationalism, militarism, etc. And so I think thinking about alternative forms of higher education is a very important issue. What I enjoyed most about this special issue, which makes it so special, in my opinion, is that it is a meeting ground of different geographical areas. It's a meeting ground of different languages, as Tristan already mentioned. And it's also a meeting ground of people working from a practitioner perspective, from a political perspective, from an activist perspective, in different fields. Fields we more or less know about, that they are occurring, but we don't read them normally. For example, crossings in our special issue happen between cooperative forms of higher education, social movement inspired higher education, but also rather institutional responses, top-down responses, looking for alternatives. We have examples coming from indigenous and or intercultural education, coming from arts education, coming from urban planning, from other pedagogical approaches in educational sciences. So I think it's a great opportunity to get to know these different approaches, and also to go beyond all too simple answers with regards to our question on within or beyond the university, because there are possibilities of combining within and beyond. And I think several articles, we'll talk about this in a moment, several articles very creatively combine the answer to this question, not reproducing dichotomies about top down and bottom up, but showing that there are spheres of innovation which can happen starting from within and then moving beyond, but at the same time also initiatives coming from a very grassroots perspective and then joining mainstream universities by subverting them, by transforming them. And so I look very much forward to this meeting. And of course, you already see in the chat, there are the two links to both ways, the Cielo database of our articles and the journal's own webpage in order to read through these contributions to the special issue. Thank you again very much for hosting this meeting here. Thanks, Ecoversities Alliance.
Okay, I think thanks for that, Gunther. So I think we're going to kick off now, and the way we'll do this, we thought we would avoid presentations of each of the articles, partly because you can go away and read them another time if your appetites have been whetted sufficiently, but also because we thought we would avoid the kind of overload of presentations and PowerPoints and everything that we're all probably sick of. So what we thought we'd do instead is, and we will hear a little bit from each of the articles, but we thought we would have three key questions that we pose, and then we can give the authors of each of the articles a chance to respond to the questions in turn. So that's the more formal part of it at the start of the session. And then once that's over, we can just open it out. And at that point, people can ask questions if they like, or even, but also they can just, just flow with whatever ideas or comments they have around the theme. For others who are here, please feel free also to chip in on the key questions that we're posing at the start, or to take the discussion along other lines as you like. And I'm not quite sure what the established practice of the conference is, but I think you can chat if you'd like to pose to the speakers, or just to put forward your questions orally as well is absolutely fine. Would anyone like to say anything before we kick off with the first question? Is there anyone like to make an intervention at this point, or call the whole thing off? Okay, we can. If not, anyone? Okay, we can kick off then with our first question, which is the one that's most closely linked to the conference, the theme of the special issue itself. And that is, what perspectives does your article give on the question raised by the special issue of within or beyond the university? So what possibilities and constraints on transformation of higher education are there between working inside mainstream universities and operating at the margins of the system by setting up alternative institutions? So how does your article speak to this question of within or beyond? We can go in any order for these. I should have said earlier, apologies, I forgot to. So we unfortunately, Elie, Ghanem, Gianna Pellegrini and Antônio Góes aren't able to be here with us, which is a real shame. They'd written about a very interesting initiative around Indigenous education in São Gabriel da Cachoeira in northwestern Amazon. So we won't be able to have their contributions today, which is a real shame. But I think we still have 6 articles represented. Ecoversities Alliance, a 5-year experiment in cosmopolitical learning. towards a higher education system for indigenous students, intercultural universities in Mexico, deinstitutionalization and renewal in higher education. I should be able to pronounce that one because that's my own article. Trying socio-territorial diversity and territoriality and neoliberalism in the case of the Universidad Estatal de Aysén in Chile, and one amongst many higher education institutions in an ecosystem of urban pedagogies. We also had in a special issue an interview with Boaventura de Sousa Santos and Luis Fernando Cují, which was which I hope you'll also find interesting as well, getting their reflections. So who would like to kick us off with the first question? How does your article speak to the tension, the dialogue, the relationship between working inside and outside the mainstream of higher education? Anyone like to kick us off? Or we can go down the, or we can do some kind of order.
Tristan, I was going to suggest the opposite. I mean, because the three of us have spoken a bit, so maybe have and maybe someone opposite, and maybe someone in a later time zone that might be one of going first as well. I mean, the days just started here in Hawaii, so maybe.
Well, that would be either our that would be Asia, or that would be our Indian colleagues or UK colleagues, I think. I imagine, I don't think we have anything further to the east than that. So
I think Julia is going to start us off. Hey, Julia.
Hi.
Go for it.
Yes, with the Indian UK connection here, I got the link that this might be our paper. So first of all, I mean, thank you so much for that space at the conference and also for that space in the special issue. I think that our relation to the special issue has changed quite a bit since we had this first meeting, which I think was a year ago or so almost, which really got us to think about the relation between and within and beyond higher education. So I'm co-authoring a paper together with Ghanem, who is also here, as well as Ruchika Lal from the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and Adriana Allen from University College London. And we're coming to this question from the perspective of urban planning and urban practice. And so not entering through the institutional viewpoint and the question of within or at the margins, but really coming to it from the question of how do we learn for urban practice and for urban planning that is more just, that is more sustainable, that is more inclusive, etc. And so from this perspective, higher education institutions are one amongst many. If we're looking at the different kinds of knowledges that urban practitioners are using in the city, how our cities are planned, how cities are made, then the universities are or have never been the authoritative knowledge holders. And if we're looking at the case of Indian cities, where the majority of cities are still to be built, then the question of where the universities are and how we can dislocate that relation of university, society, etc. in urban planning is just shifting a bit the view. So we've been working with this relationality between the subversity and the pluriversity rather than using one or the other as a starting point. And looking on the one hand at the practices at workshops that the Indian Institute for Human Settlements is doing with activists, and on the other hand at the Habitat International Coalition in Latin America, and specifically university members within that coalition, who also have a very different way of looking at what they're calling like the social production of habitat, of engaging with popular habitat practices. And so I think, that was our way of approaching it, was never to say either or taking one as the entry point, but to look at the city, to look at urban practice, and then see, where do different kinds of actors sit, what how do we even, who is defining what is at the margins and what is at the center? If we're looking at popular habitat practices, this is the majority of how cities are being made. So where does the university then stand or sit? So I think, yeah, I want to leave it there. Getika, I don't know if you want to add something.
Just a very quick point on the frame of epistemic justice that we took. So basically, in addition to the urban planning and practice that Julia is speaking about, we also sort of work with the idea of epistemic justice and how to bring that in the context of global South cities. So basically, just to like sort of, so the role of either the higher education institutions or beyond, in case of, let's say, HIC and the partnerships with the universities, the idea is premised on fighting those epistemic injustices to make urban practice more inclusive, and speaking, like taking all knowledges into account while working towards urban practice. I think that's all for now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Shall we move next to ASEN? Francisco, are you?
Yes. Can you hear
hi,
me?
Francisco. Great. Yes.
Hey. Hello, everyone. First of all, yeah, thank you to everyone, to Ecoversities Alliance and Tristan and the others, to Gunther and the others, for this amazing and fantastic special issue. Yes, regarding the first question, I would like to say just a few words. We analyzed this case, the case of the University of ASEN, which is a state university, a very new university. It was created like 5 or 6 years ago. So we analyzed this case from the perspective of a possibility. The possibility of this university of becoming a subversity. But we understood the concept of subversity a bit different. It's not to be completely offside. For us, this possibility is to create an outside within an inside. So we use this concept in that way. How this university can become a subversity. That is to say, a university outside the neoliberal market model of higher education. So we argue that this possibility lies in the constitution of something very specific, the social council, because the university created this social council as a response to the social movement, because this university was created as a result of some social protests, social movement that took place in 2011 in Chile, in the south of Chile. So we characterize the social council as a kind of liminal place, as a space of dialogue and resistance of these traditional university functions and academic practices. It's a kind of place that navigates between the inside and the outside, between the academic community and the local one. So it is the place where the different voices of the local community come together. That is important. Come together to discuss the need of the region and the demands of the community. But also, we analyze this from the perspective of a conflict, because this space must be thought of from the perspective of the conflict, a place that is at the same time opaque, hierarchical, and fragmented. So the social council embodies the conflict of social life. So just to sum up, we analyze this case from the perspective of this possibility, the possibility of becoming something else within the system. And this possibility lies in this social council, which is we analyze this social council from the perspective of conflictivity, of the conflict of social life. Yeah, that's it. That is for now, for the first question. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Francisco. I think next up is Sônia. We're moving to Paraná, Brazil.
Hi.
We can hear you, Sônia.
Hi, could you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and many thanks for to be part of this incredible special issue. This is so, when Tristan invited me to take part in this special issue, it really was for me important because it connects to the work that I have been done for many years with social movements. And then together with Aline Nunes dos Santos, that she's not here with me, and she did a master degree with me, and that we discussed the teacher training in the context of rural socio-territorial diversity. And this is a teacher training related to the area of education of the countryside. We call this Educação do Campo, and I would like to use this name in Portuguese because even in my article in the translation we use this in Portuguese because this is different than when we are talking about rural education, because when we talk about rural education we are talking about a concept that is relating to the idea that the knowledge and of people from the rural areas are not being considered in universities and other issues. But when we are talking about Educação do Campo, we are talking not about just the possibility for people from rural areas, indigenous people, people from quilombos communities, from settlements and from different places in rural communities, from them to be able to be part at the university. And also it's about the concept that is related to what we are discussed here in this article. It's about, and that it's really related to the main issue of the article, of the special issue. It's the idea that when we are discussing, when we are analyzing this higher education through a teacher training course, this is related to a concept that is connected to a pedagogy of social movements, to the pedagogy of the oppressed, and to the colonial pedagogy. The idea to develop a teacher training for rural schools that considers epistemological idea related to the coloniality, that considers the knowledge that people takes from their own spaces, and also the possibility that the university goes through the communities to develop this course. And this is also something very important that we analyze and we discuss in this article. Is a way that to develop knowledge that is connected to the reality that people are living, the students are living there, and teachers go to the place where the students are. And also what we call the pedagogy of alternância, the alternate pedagogy that it's also involved to the process of the higher education. Instead of just being part of the moment that they are at university, the students need to, in their education, to connect theory and practice to this process of being part at university, what is considered in their own local communities, and part doing their work with communities. And I think this challenged the way that we think about universities, about knowledge, about who is enabled, or who can talk about knowledge, who is considered the ones who produce knowledge. And I think in this way, this article connects to this special issue and to the idea of working inside, because this is a regular course inside the Federal University of Paraná, but it also a course that challenges the way that university work with people, with students, and allow for people to be part of the university.
Sônia, for sharing those thoughts. I think next up is Gunther.
Yes, thank you very much, Tristan. Very similarly to what Sônia just mentioned, my co-author and partner, Laura Selene, and myself wrote a piece about intercultural universities in Mexico with regard to indigenous students. It's a new kind of subsystem of universities emerging in the last 15 years, approximately 20 years. And so in the article, we examine three models of intercultural university: a governmental university created top-down by regional governments. Secondly, an independent model of social movement or NGO-driven alternative university. And thirdly, a university model, an intercultural university model created from within an autonomous university. And so we discussed the pros and cons of the three models. And what we find is that they are very different from each other if you view them from a legal perspective, from an institutional or a management perspective. But on the other hand, the problems they are facing are very similar if you take the perspective from the key actors: teaching staff, students, community actors. And so we see similar criticisms to the lack of epistemic justice, to the lack of dialogue in the curriculum, and to certain problems related to graduates coming from these universities. And so through the article, what we try to establish are these similar challenges, which occur both if you work from within academia and if you work as an alternative to academia, because it has to do to the ways to access university. If you are from an indigenous rural background, it has to do with what to study, which kind of study program is relevant for somebody living in a small indigenous community in the mountains or in the forest. What does it mean to have a university degree? Is it only helpful in order to immigrate, in order to abandon the region, or does it also help and empower people to stay and to do alternative kinds of development initiatives? The other issue was also how to teach and how to learn more dialogically in an intercultural university, even in the so-called independent or autonomous intercultural universities. We see suddenly through ethnography very conventional, very monological ways of teaching and learning. And so there's not that much innovation in the ways you can learn and teach, in independent universities, and we know other non-independent, more governmental universities, where certain teams of teaching and students, teaching staff and student, develop rather alternative ways of learning which go beyond the classroom, which have a lot to do with community service and other political activities around the BA they are studying. And then we finally talk about ways of graduating from such an alternative university. What is the worth of a university title? What is the worth of your own language? How can you use your own language in order to graduate, to use your own language in order to write a BA thesis or an MA thesis? And so this is not corresponding to the division between governmental and non-governmental universities. So directly responding to Tristan's question, I think there are lots of heteronomia, lots of dependencies also inside so-called independent universities. At least here in Mexico, several of these universities which do not receive governmental funding and governmental guidelines, they do depend on other funding from foundations, from NGOs, from churches, and from international development cooperation. And so their degree or to maneuver is not that broader than the one from governmental institutions because of these problems, and because a certain church institution or a certain development agency ends up imposing their own guidelines to what is pertinent or what is relevant for the indigenous context. And so there is still a huge need to decolonize all these three forms of intercultural universities we are analyzing in the article. Thanks, Tristan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gunther. And I'm sure a lot of these points raised by all of the speakers we've had so far will be picked up in the discussion. Some great points there. I think next we're on to Gerardo, Kelly, and Udi.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Tristan. Thanks all the speakers too. So I'll share a little bit about our articles, which is a kind of reflection on which I wrote with Gerardo and Kelly here, which is a reflection on our involvement with the Ecoversities Alliance over the last 7 years. And as someone who has also been in and out of academia for almost 2 decades, and also appreciating, as comes across really in the special issues, that there's many different kinds of universities, right? It's never just one kind of monolithic model, but there's many kinds all over the world. And having had the experience of different kinds of university, also connecting with many really exciting places that are innovating outside of the mainstream through the Ecoversities Alliance. I know in one of the articles, I think Tristan, you mentioned this about the term alternative, how that could also be, to speak about alternative could also be a little bit belittling and so forth. And I like our friend Koo, she talks about not alternative, but preferred higher education. So I like that subversion of that. But one thing though, as being mentioned by other papers, is that there are deep challenges across the spheres, whether you're inside or outside, right? I think that the papers mention many of the challenges that of being in the inside and the different attacks as well on the institutions of education, from neoliberalism, managerialism, also from right-wing, kind of fundamentalists and so forth in many parts of the world. So those things are important to address, but also many challenges, as have been suggested here, exist outside of the mainstream. There's also the danger of insularity. There's also the danger of not connecting with other things which are happening in the world, and also even of fundamentalisms within that too. So one thing that we engage with in this in our paper, in reflecting on the experience of the Alliance itself, which emerged as really as an attempt, as an experiment in creating a space of encounter between different people who were experimenting and different projects who were really wanting to exit the kind of system, the monolithic system of that they inherited within these higher education spaces, in a way, what we did in the paper is also engage with the kind of underpinning ontologies, if you like, that tend to inform many, at least the modern model of the university. So we use the concept that we borrowed and sweated with, as you can see in the article, of cosmopolitics from a philosopher of science and philosopher Isabel Stengers. And we talk about the possibility of cosmopolitical learning, that is, of learning across and between ontologies. So one thing that, many within, even though they could take different forms, many, if not most, models of the university do inherit a kind of Eurocentric model of knowledge creation and a kind of ontology that basically says, that there is one world, and that there's many kind of cultures inhabiting this, but the premise and the ground of that ontology is primarily known through the various sciences and kind of scientific methodology as derived from Europe. And so what we've done in the Alliance, in a way, is what happens when different kinds of ontologies enter into conversation with each other. What are the possibilities of genuine encounter and reflection across these ways of being, knowing, doing, and relating? And so one thing that the Alliance's interventions within this debate is, in a way, you could say a kind of prefigurative one, which is the importance of creating spaces of encounter where there's a real openness to, well, how do you do this kind of dialogue? How do you do this kind of conversation in an authentic way, which doesn't overprivilege the one world ontology that universities are typically accustomed to, but is generally open to other ways of knowing, being, and doing in the world. And so, and in that prefigurative way, then that opens up to other ways of encountering and relating and being together. And just as a living example of this, this very conference has been, in a way, emerges to the kind of creativity of innovating and creating other ways of being together. So you can see this is not a typical conference. There's lots of different kinds of spaces. It's not a traditional academic conference. There's ways of, even though it's virtual, that we can also engage through play, through embodied practices. There's kind of spaces of chance and emergence, and these kinds of things if you've seen the program. And all of these things are obviously they're much more easier to have an experience of if we were meeting face to face, including, and this is I guess the reason why I brought the air at the beginning here, including the crucial importance of learning from the non-human, which many other ontologies do prioritize as well and consider as significant teachers. So how we do that in the Alliance is a kind of the point of a great point of reflection, and this is the focus of the article. And just to finish off, I would say one learning, if you like, of the within the Alliance is this, that in a way, regardless of the form of the university, and there's many kinds of forms as the various papers address, if we focus on the ontologies that are behind them and what are they actually proposing and what are they suggesting in terms of ways of being, knowing, doing, and relating, one thing that we can have in common and can prioritize is this idea of the university, whether you're inside or outside, being at the service of flourishing for planetary flourishing. So we that's why we term the ecoversities, the idea of the oikos, right? The home. So how can the university be at the service of our oikos, our home, whether it's our planetary home or our communities, but that knowledge creation, teaching, and all these things ought to be at the service of that flourishing and in our communities of the human, but also of the non-human. So that's, I guess, the invitation of the Ecoversities Alliance, of focusing and creating alliances, if you like, whether you're inside or outside, but that you have at your heart this vision of flourishing for humans and the non-humans, and the planetary flourishing too. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Udi. I think my article's the only one left, so I'll say just a few words on that, and then after that we'll open up for a round of questions and discussion before we move on to the next one. So we've had one comment through already, which we'll look at after my little bit, but please do put forward any other thoughts you have in the comments, or just wait until we open up and then we'll bring you in then. If you use the hand raise function, or just shout out is also fine. So my own article is almost completely theoretical. I do make reference to a couple of real life cases, Untitled and Swaraj, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, but it's not an empirical study, it's really a theoretical reflection. And what I try to do in the article is to think about whether it's possible to imagine a university or higher education without the institutional elements. So is the experience of whatever we might think of as higher learning or university possible without the institutional trappings? And naturally, I draw here on Ivan Illich's critique of institutions, both in Deschooling Society and his works where he looked at other sectors of society. And Illich's main point, I suppose, was that institutions which dominate the way we organize ourselves collectively start off with good intentions. They form, whether we're thinking about social norms or formal organizations, they are established and developed in order to protect things that we value and cherish in our lives and in our lives collectively. But what happens is that over time they start to stagnate and ossify, and if you're not careful, they start to undermine the very good that they were established to protect and to promote. And that's certainly what's happened with our educational institutions, where we mistake the the means for the ends, and qualification, diploma disease, and all the other things. So from that perspective, if we think about the university as a kind of an ossified structure that's overlived its usefulness, at least partially, and I want to say at this point, I don't actually see the university as a pernicious institution compared to most of the other ones we have in our society. I think it's one of our better ones, actually. But that's not to say that it's the best or the only way to organize higher learning. And I think what we really need to do is to think deeply about the homogeneity of universities, despite the superficial diversity. We have universities, different parts of the world, we have different types of higher education institution, whether they're polytechnic, technical, more academic, different languages. Some people point to Confucian and Scandinavian and Latin American forms of the university. And of course, there is some diversity, but underneath that, there are some very strong similarities in the institutional forms. And in the article, I look at these in terms of three main types. Gates, so that the access to the university, mainly in terms of students, but also in terms of what comes into the university in ideas. The roles that are undertaken in the university of the distinctions between lecturers and students. Within those, the different kinds of roles taken on by staff and so forth. and the controls that they have over knowledge. And then finally, badges, which are the ways that we give validation to student learning and to academic knowledge through journals and so forth. And that these are very entrenched and often invisible, these structures, and yet they determine what happens in our higher institutions. So the thought experiment then is, what happens if you take these things away? And Untitled and Swaraj are great examples of beyond or outside the system, where they're really challenging these things. And I think the question here is not perhaps living without any of these institutional forms. I think probably it's always going to be a cycle, because you challenge these things, you set up something outside the system without these elements. Probably over time they start to reinsert themselves again. If you look over the years. So probably what we're always in is a cycle, but one that really needs regular refreshing and challenging, identifying some of these elements and to challenge them. Okay, so those were just a few ideas from how I was looking at this question of from the beyond perspective or the outside, and how we can understand some of these initiatives and the important role that they play, not only as valuable initiatives in their own right, but in causing us to question what we think of as the university in my view, very valuable ways. Okay, let's open up now for some questions and comments. And I think we had the first one we had through the chat was from, sorry, I'm scrolling through to get the name of the person. And I don't know, it was on Mexico and teenagers and career designs and so forth, the drug crisis and so forth.
Tristan,
is it Laura?
I have the comment.
Laura Rios, yeah.
Laura Rios.
Yeah.
Laura, would you like to state your question, or are you happy for us just to go ahead with what you've written?
Sorry, I got late and I just heard Gunther speaking about universities in Mexico that are funded by civil organizations. And I was interested in that because of the violence here, because of the drug war and femicides. Teenagers, especially girls, dream to be lawyers, it has to do with justice, no? And they want to be forensic lawyers or civil or penal, but the only thing finally they can reach is the church. So they don't, and I was interested in these universities to let them know. I think if one of those girls access to another thing that is not the church and something that has to do with their dreams, I think they can take this to their communities. But usually it's very difficult to get into the. I don't know. We don't have contact with these universities. For example, you mentioned Gunther. That is it's a really practical thing to make them know that they have other possibilities, and trying to get homes, for example, with people in the cities that they can accept students from other places, and they can really get into another context. And I don't know, there is a woman in the market where I live that she sells cheeses. All her family sells things in the market. Market is really traditional thing here in Mexico, and she's a lawyer now. She's really proud. She achieved to move from his little town to 50 kilometers away from her home, and now she's a lawyer, and now she has a degree. But I think it would be good to know the list or where to find more options. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, If you put your email there, I can send you some information. These intercultural universities are very locally rooted ones, both the governmental ones and the NGO-driven ones, but they do compete directly with the drug cartels. We noticed it in Guerrero, in Oaxaca, in Veracruz, that we have to convince families that their young people should go to our university instead of joining the drug cartels. And you know this this motto of the current president in Mexico of becarios y no sicarios. So there is some financial support in order to get the rural youth away from the drug cartels and to give them possibilities to go on studying. But the question about studying also has to do with what you do afterwards. If you have a law degree afterwards, normally you end up moving away from your community because you cannot apply your profession in the local community. And this is why the intercultural universities are inventing new kinds of BA programs which do not force you out of the region, of the community. But if you leave me your email, I can send you some web pages of these universities. And there are in each of the rural regions of indigenous regions of Mexico, there are already these initiatives, sometimes driven by, organized by governments, sometimes by church initiatives, or by other kinds of foundations or social movements, like indigenous movements who run their own university. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Gunther.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think there's also an interchange between Bridget and the Ecoversities article. I don't know if Bridget, you'd like to expand on that at all?
Thanks, Tristan. I'd love to, yeah. I'm so excited by this talk. It feels so close to my heart. So I've been exploring futuring methodologies, immersive methodologies, as a way for communities and organizations and individuals to engage in possible futures or storytell together about the future and then experience an immersion into those stories in order to bring something of that back into the present day in the way that then collectives make decisions or set intentions around the future. And I've been exploring this methodology with students, with organizations, and now there's the possibility to try and work with a center within a university in South Africa to explore what learning might look like in the future. But yeah, I'm just intrigued to see whether something like that has been done anywhere before, or because the university, well, at least this particular university feels like such a monolith and so stuck in the past. And yeah, just getting a sense of whether such methodologies have helped, or whether working with the future within a university space is something that has led to any kinds of shifts, or yeah, just this question of human agency and willingness to shift as an individual, whereas the kind of systemic institutional holding back. And I'd love to hear a little bit your thoughts around that.
Rudy, Kelly, Gerardo, do you want to come back on that?
I was going to say, Michelle, do you want to say something first? And then we can...
Yeah, I heard South Africa, so being from South Africa. Yeah, so hi, you know, this conversation intrigues me, and for a long time, so one of my students, I teach ecological, I'm sort of bringing the non-human worlds into sociology. And I'm doing a PhD in environmental humanities. And so, but one of my students, Sarah, participated in the Ecoversity gathering in Uganda, and she introduced me to Ecoversities in 2020, and then you've seen my face, some of you, since then. And I just want to say, for a long time, I had this idea, or in the last 2 years, that I could, this idea of bringing the Ecoversity in the university, but I have dropped that idea. And I'm feeling that the work of, you know, rethinking, you know, the world, or post-extractive and post-capitalist, is the work that happens in the cracks outside of the university. And although in my own work, I work with community struggle, bring the activists into the community. One of our struggles against sort of concrete development is one of the people is now also linked to the Ecoversity space, and so I'm thinking that I need to put my energies more in creating the Ecoversities where struggle happens, because the university is a monolith, and even in South Africa, where we had a moment of discussing decolonization and peas must fall, you know, but ultimately, you know, yeah, I mean, that space of the disciplinaries, so, you know, how it's situated, things can happen in between, but not significantly. So, yeah, so yeah, as I said, I'm feeling more and more the work of the kind of radical shift is outside of the university. Even when you experiment with bringing activists in, and you have the discussions of bringing in, you know, non-human worlds or etc. Individual students sometimes take to it. A lot of my students say they're so refreshed because they haven't heard about Anna Singh or Donna Haraway or you know, in this work, you know, at the university. So but yeah, as I said, I'm feeling more and more that it's not the space, yeah, for radical change.
Thanks, Michelle. I wanted to, well, just to say a couple of things about what Bridget had also posed about some of the futures work. So, I mean, I've been thinking, well, we've been thinking doing some of that within Ecoversities generally in terms of pedagogies, you know, activities, ways of gathering, but also bringing some of that into the classroom is also completely possible, you know. So, I mean, we've done a lot of dragon dreaming. That's been an awesome kind of, and that can be extended, it can be, you know, shortened, but that's been, that every single time we've done it, there's been some really wonderful things that have emerged. One of the things actually I write about in our article was a way of visioning that we did at the first gathering for Ecoversities that we had, which was actually the most, of all the gatherings that we've done within the Ecoversities, it was the most emergent, and it was both the most beautiful and the most difficult because of all the various kind of power issues that emerged. And we actually, yesterday in the session that was also engaging with the within and beyond universities, we talked a little bit about the power issues at play, but I think taking on some of that within some of these different approaches to visioning can bring about, you know, forms of emergence, whether it's within or beyond. And I think that's really important. And that's really up to, you know, each of us, you as the facilitator of teaching, knowledge production, whatever it is, you know, and, you know, bringing activists in, but also getting students out. I mean, I worked with my students, I kind of forced them into participating in the Occupy movement that was going on in 2010, you know, so I think it's, and just to say also, yesterday we talked about a lot of, you know, the importance of solidarity and relationships actually in supporting each of us, which is isolating in the monoliths that some of us are in within the university, but that there is a lot going on. And that's been one of the most profound shifts for so many people within the Alliance is that there's other like-minded people, which has been amazing. So, and that, you know, sharing conversations, experiences of emergence, and how challenging that is, but how rewarding it is simultaneously. Yeah, it has been really one of the most wonderful aspects to it. And again, one of the most difficult. And one other thing to say finally is that there is somebody within the Alliance, I think she was supposed to speak also a couple of days ago, Carrie Facer. I know Tristan knows her as well. She does a lot of work in future studies, and she's in the UK. If you put your email address, I'm happy to connect you both. And so she does a lot of work in that too. So, thanks. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Gerardo, you wanna chip in?
I just add a very quick note regarding the quote by Arundhati Roy that I shared, and that when we think about this exercise of futuring, and I agree with this idea of how to prevent the co-optation and the instrumentalization of this thing is also to develop a sensibility that is attuned to the futures that are already here and that are already emerging. And that in that sense that's why I put that quote of it's also about learning to listen to the breathing of what is already here, and that is planting the seed of different futures.
Can I say something?
Issa, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Just a reply. I've worked quite a lot also with future studies. My experience is that working with that inside university, that's all totally fine as long as you're not successful, or as long as you're not questioning the hegemonic story, because future is about alternatives. Future is about questioning the now, and I don't. For me, it's been so much more successful to work outside the uni, inviting uni people, but to be in another environment, to be in a forest, working with futures, because it's difficult to do that. And I'm Bridget, if you want to, I'm happy to share my. I've written a little bit about that too, but beware of the hijacking possibilities, said a bitter old person. Yeah.
So we have Ella and then Laura.
Yes, thank you. Just building on that and expanding on Bridget's question, I work as a settler in what is known as British Columbia, Canada, for an Indigenous nation that is just recently in the last 5 years signed a treaty and are officially self-determining. So they have complete control as sort of a nation within a nation over their entire education system. But at the moment, they have no schools or anything located on their land. And one of the things we've been exploring is the idea of, we piloted a 13-moon, completely outdoor sort of knowledge keeper type approach to education that was land-based for their community. There was so much interest that we're looking at expanding that to be led almost as sort of a tying in an unschooling model. But at the same time, we've been working with local universities in British Columbia who have said we will recognize this as a pathway to higher education, which is really exciting because in this community, there's only about 25 fluent language speakers left, and language revitalization is really important. So I wanted to share that because I'm not aware globally, I've been looking, of any other groups that have this sort of quote freedom, yet we're still within a colonial system, but the ability to really expand and design something unique in this way. But I'm worried about, as I've been learning more about neoliberalism, it expanding and absorbing this and it being weaponized. And also similar to what I pronounce your name wrong, Ase just said, sorry if I said that wrong. I'm worried about whether this will become co-opted as well and will end up just causing more harm. so I was just curious if anyone has any thoughts or reflections on that, because of course we're trying to move at the speed of trust, but it's very difficult. Thank you.
Thanks, Elie. I have I'll got a few things I'd like to respond on that. But Laura, do you want to go first, and then I'll.
Yes, thank you. I'm really. I would like to know if. Sorry, I was just thinking in people I know that they are. It's so sad to see them, how they lose their families because of the drug war, and they have to move the city, and how much they appreciate the knowledge, and they don't find it anywhere, not in the schools, just maybe in the church or between them. But I am looking really and ask you, because it's really difficult in Mexico to find ONGs that people can reach. And I'm looking really for teachers for teenagers. If someone here knows about it, here I know it's about a personal effort. We cannot wait institutions because people is dying, people is suffering, and it's just about the personal efforts. If someone here knows a place that someone wants to offer a class or a session or a conversation for these teenagers, just out of the institution in any moment, please contact me. I just want to put that, because here it's really difficult to get access to money, now with this government is almost impossible. All civil organizations died, and that's really a pity.
Thanks, Paula. And I think it's great if we can make this space both one of academic or general discussion, but also a very personal one, as you've put in. And if people are able to provide some suggestions, do get in contact with Laura, and a very crucial issue being faced there. Did Ella raised perhaps I'll just say something about the case of Brazil in relation to Ella's point from before. But I mean, there are indigenous territories in Brazil that have a degree, well, they have quite considerable autonomy, and as you know, as in all places, the territorial integrity is constantly being threatened from a variety of different economic interests, and it's very hard to maintain, and the indigenous groups battle constantly to keep that. And there is an element of educational autonomy as well, which is really interesting. And it's such a shame that our colleagues Elie, Diana and Antônio aren't with us, because they would have been the ones to share with you their experiences of working in northeastern Amazon. But perhaps you can connect with them after the session. They don't write about it so much in this article, but other work that they've done talks about the indigenous schools that have been created there and they're state-funded institutions, but they have autonomy to create their own curricula and use their languages and have a very different model of education. I mean, in a sentence, you know, what the experience has been is some fantastic examples, but it's a constant battle against the national evaluations, because of course, if you're, you know, the standardized assessments, you know, do not allow the autonomy that the Constitution actually allows them to create their own schools. So they're still being judged by standards which they don't hold and aims which they don't have. So that's the constant battle there within education, is to show their worth when there aren't the evaluative tools that do that at a national level. So I think it's been a very frustrating experience, but there have been some fantastic examples at school level. At university level, much harder in Brazil to do that. But, yeah. Anyway, just a few little thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Would anyone else like to comment on that? Thanks for raising the issue, Ella. Would anyone else like to come back on that issue? Udi, were you going to come in there?
No, I was just going to suggest I could take a quick temperature of the room, but to see as we're kind of almost, well, a little bit after halfway, if people want like we could take a quick 5-minute break, stretch, and when we come back, we could ask the second question. So why don't you, Tristan, maybe just pose the second question?
Maybe do the second and third because of time.
Or maybe do the second and third because of time, and then whoever from the presenters wants to speak to that, thinks over the 5-minute stretch break, and then we'll come back in 5 minutes at 1:30. How does that sound? Is that okay? Yeah.
Good. So I'll pose the questions now.
Yeah.
So people can think of it over their tea and biscuits. Okay. So what are the challenges? The first one is, what are the challenges and barriers in practice of experimentation alternatives in higher education, and what are the factors that lead to successful implementation of innovation? So looking more close up now, experiences in practice, innovating, challenging, either within or outside. What are the challenges and barriers that are faced in the different cases that we've been looking at? And what are the factors, the generative practices that have allowed these innovations to take root and to succeed in their aim? So that's the first one. And the second one, the final question we've got is, many alternative forms of higher education push the boundaries of what we think of as the university, and some may not be recognized by all as higher education institutions. What light does your article shed on our conceptualization or definition of the university? What does it mean to be a university, and how does this experimentation actually push, or maybe even push to breaking point, our idea of what the university is? And is this a positive thing, or perhaps should we just use a different label at all and just abandon the idea of university? So those are the two questions that we'll be looking at after the break.
Great. So Michelle, maybe you want to just put music on for 5 minutes, like a low level music, and we'll be back at 1:30, wherever you are.
No problem.
In 5 minutes.
Except if you're in India. Sorry.
Except
or Nepal, yeah.
Don't worry, I'm in Cape Town at the moment. I'll follow.
I wanna be free, so free, like a feather blowing through the breeze, like a bird in a tree, like a dolphin in the sea. I wanna fly high, so high, like an eagle in the sky. And when my time has come, I'll let it all go with a sigh. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. I wanna be free, me, to be the holy being that I see, not to rise and not to fall, be at one with love and all. There is no high, no low, there's nowhere else to go, except inside. Open up your heart and be just who you are. Pachamama, home to the place where I belong. Pachamama,
Everyone,
to the place where I belong.
just give one more minute and then we can start. People will rise back.
Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong.
Thanks, Michelle. You can. Thank you for the music. Welcome back, everybody. Tristan, you wanna call the order back of the?
Yeah, I think should we just go in the same order to keep it simple? Should we have people answering both questions, Udi, or
I think
or just one at a time?
I'm just saying because we have at the most less than an hour. So if we're going to open it up, I think we can try and fit the
Fine.
two.
So speak to both, yeah.
Yes, I think that'd be better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go in the same order as before. So I think it's Julia and Gitika.
Thanks, Tristan. I'll start on the higher education and then pass on to Julia for the next one. So I think I want to focus from the experience of the Indian Institute for Human Settlements for answering this bit, and really make, I think, points around 4 things. One is around, I think, the institutional status and what it helps us to do or not. So just to give a background, IHS is a private institution, so we are not yet a university, which in some ways, help us to do certain things which otherwise would not be possible. So I'll give you an example. For instance, we so in order to have the diversity of pedagogues in the classroom, we employ these fellows of practice who are actually activists on the grounds. So that's a possibility which sort of allows us to bring them in as faculty members and not really NGO partners who's coming in to give a guest lecture. So they're part of IHS faculty. So I think that really helps in some ways, and in certain ways then it also is a barrier in terms of reaching scale and funding and all those things. So that's the first point. The second point, which we really try to work on, is this whole idea of diversity. So diversifying learners, and that demand actually came from the activist to be able to, know tools of the trade so that they can intervene more in the urban practice. So that's where the demand to get trained in urban planning vocabulary and how the technical tools work came in, and that's where we started. And I just spoke about diversifying the pedagogues as well, and also in terms of the spaces of learning. So it's not, I guess, enough to have the bringing in sort of activists into the classroom or taking students to the classroom, but moving the whole setup to where people are and doing sort of workshops where they are. The third point which I want to speak to is around this idea of the flexibility and how much we are able to, because if we are running these courses which are demand driven, then we also need to be sort of open to that demand and how that changes, and to be able to respond to that, which we really saw during COVID as well. So when COVID hit, people there was loss of livelihoods and all. So thinking through these long-term strategies around urban planning and practice didn't make much sense. So then we also and that raised the capacity of us as well, at the institution, that are we really, capable of making these changes whenever there is a different demand. But we because we're working through the No project, we also linked it to this whole idea of mutual care and solidarity. And if that becomes a central principle, then you try to learn along and see that how that partnership then carries on. And through that, actually, we've seen that, then the activists become, then they take it forward. So that translocality is what we are able to see in our own projects as well. So we are able to transpose these learnings across different spectrums. So that has been the thing. The last thing, and I'll stop there, is around funding. And I know that a lot of these projects have are sort of along with some project or funding channel, and then they stop as well. But what we tried to do was that we have not attached it to a particular funding, and we just try to experiment it whenever any project comes, or experimenting with different sources of funding. But having said that, we also don't have we haven't decided that, okay, this is the institutional home for this kind of work. So there is that future uncertainty which we are still working with. But for now, having not in a particular project has helped us to continue for more than 5 years now. I'll stop there. And pass on to Julia.
Thank you, Getika. And perhaps just to move on to the third question on how our article sheds light on a different kind of conceptualization of the university. I think what we really want to bring it back to is that understanding of critical pedagogy in terms of the political that is in the pedagogies and the pedagogies that are in the political struggles that are happening around urban practice. And in that way, I think the universities and the other pedagogic experiences, like what Getika was just talking about, are really about situating. About situating learning and having a clear goaling of learning for some kind of change. And so then the question, I think, came around the institutions, around how they're really becoming allies, no? What I heard now about the Ecoversities Alliance. How do you learn in alliance, with an alliance, and as an ally? What kind of capacities do you develop? And I think, so that is one question that was really triggered around, this kind of positioning. And the other question was that, I think, around challenging this kind of the triage that often exists with different names around universities having a pillar that is teaching, a pillar that is learning, and a pillar that is some kind of public engagement or community work or whatever it is called. And really looking for examples where, those are so intertwined that being an ally just works across and is very transversal. So I think those are the ways that we're trying to rethink the concept of the university. Thank you.
Fantastic, thanks. Francisco.
Hey, again. I would like to say that really enjoyed the discussion. I wanted to say something very quickly about this idea of about the question about of this special issue about within or beyond university. We didn't write about this, but I think is that this is a very interesting question, but sometimes is quite difficult to think about from a dichotomy. You know, I think for example, from the perspective of our case from the University of Aysén, is like we're always inside something. I mean, when you are outside, you are already inside this. So, because the question is, can we put ourselves outside these kind of power relations, outside the university system? And I think from this case that it's quite difficult. And if we want to modify or to change the system as a whole, or for example, the university system, there is something always, there is a work to be done from within, So yeah, but that is a long discussion, but just wanted to say that. And I'm going to answer the second question very quickly, and the third question I'm going to would like to say a bit something about that. Okay, regarding the second question is some challenges. I mean, in this paper, if you read the paper, you will find that you will find the history of this university. And during the first year, there was a big political conflict between the university and the state, the Ministry of Education, because the university somehow didn't follow the rules, the regulation, the policies. So from the very beginning, the university became a kind of subversity, a kind of outside within this inside. So the barriers, in general terms, come from this conflict, from this political conflict. I'm not going to give more details about this. You can read it in the paper, but that was a huge, huge problem, this conflict with the Ministry of Education. But also there are other problems or barriers which come from the policies in general. You can say, of course, the ontologies and epistemologies and methodologies that come from the science, that come from the university itself, and also come from the society, some pressures from the society. But I would like to focus on the barriers or the challenges that come from this, from the social council toward the university. And we identify 3 challenges. The first one is between the concept of autonomy and the public engagement. This was a very conceptual tension or challenge, because the idea of autonomy was challenged from the social council. And here the point is to rethink the concept of autonomy, the modern concept of autonomy, and trying to engage, to entangle this concept with the public engagement. So it's both at the same time, autonomy and public engagement, and not they are not different. That is the first tension. The second one is something that you already know. It's about the scientific knowledge and other knowledges. This was very, very, very a huge problem because this university is placed in a very small region where you still can find some alternatives, knowledges, languages, and so on. So that was a huge tension. And the last one is between some academic practices. For example, this idea of to be productive, to engage with global academic journal and so on, and the needs of the local community. So there is a problem that the university is still trying to respond to the need of the community, but the academic community is thinking about, well, the global or the national. Okay, and now regarding the last question, I would like to say that this case, the analysis of the social council of this university shed some light on how to reverse neoliberalism in higher education. I'm saying this because in Chile, in particular in Chile, we have this problem. I know that in general, Latin America, we have the problem of neoliberalism. But the fight against this neoliberal agenda comes from within the university system. So the university and the social council is helping to reverse this idea of neoliberalism. But in what sense? In the sense that the social council is the community inside the university, but also is the university in the territory. So it's both at the same time. So the social council is playing an important role in making this real, this connection with the community inside the university and the university in the community. And this leads to the definition of the territorial university. And this is opposed to the well-known 19th century idea of the national university. I'm pretty sure that you know in Latin America, in particular, we still have the idea of the national university because of the republic, you know, the need to create the republic. And I think this idea of the territorial university is not just an idea of trying to resolve the social problems from the community. The point is to become the territory. And I think that is the point I would like to make here. It's not the idea of territorial university is not just to become a kind of mailbox of social problems. It's to become the territory, to be part of the territory. And in order to be part of the territory, we need to rethink again, to imagine again, a new public system, or as we call in the paper, a public regime. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, friends. Thanks very much, Francisco. Sônia.
Hi. I would like to share with you some elements that, for one side, for one hand, they are very important in the process of the coloniality in the rural teacher training, which is the experience of sharing teaching, which breaks the disciplinary organization and works on a different method of learning and teaching, which connects from a transdisciplinary and an interdisciplinary way of learning. Despite the importance of this kind of approach at the university, the Federal University of Paraná, in terms of the Educação do Campo licentiate degree, there were some problems in adopting this kind of approach, because as they didn't have like disciplines in their curriculum, it was not based on disciplines, but on this more interdisciplinary approach. What happens when they graduate, when students graduated, they were submitted to competitive public selections exams and private section selection processes for jobs, and through the disciplinary logic. And then they had some problems, because even when they started to become teachers in secondary schools or primary schools, they needed to teach from a disciplinary perspective, like some subjects like biology, chemistry, physics, and so on. And they were prepared in a different approach, and they had some problems when they needed to work. I think this was something that it was a great challenge for the university and students who take part. But I would like to raise in terms of the other question about the importance and how this experience helps in terms of the innovation and the challenge of a different approach of knowledge and of the concepts of university. I would like to discuss the importance of the organic relationships of the university with social movements. What was really clear that it was this relationship, this organic relationship was substantial in the changing of the form and the content of rural teacher training. From this idea to work from the pedagogy of the movement, from the perspective of from a critical pedagogy based on the pedagogy of the oppressed and from the decolonial perspective. This was very important because it helps the university to put itself in a position of someone that is learning in the way they are also in the experience from the experience of social movements and learning in terms of how to organize the university and especially with the connection when the university goes to the community through this experience of having like this period of community time of learning and university time of learning, and to do this in a way that university at the same time is together with the community. I think this was something important because when the university reflect on the problems of the community, they help through the students to face the challenge that also the community have. This is a different perspective of how the university can be socially important also for the community, and to learn from the community experience and to develop knowledge from this. I think this is this experience of teaching with and for people from different backgrounds from the countryside is very important to rethink the way university think about knowledge and about the organization of their university system. I think this is, thanks.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Sônia. Gunther.
Yes, thanks a lot for the space again, because I think it's a wonderful exchange we are having. I will also try to answer both of your questions. As to challenges and barriers, I think one of the most important barriers for alternatives out of the university or outside the university is the pressures of even the students themselves are facing in order to get degrees, to get certificates, to get credit points, etc. And so the farther you go out of the university, the less students you reach in our experience. And so this is one of the challenges. Do you want to end up working with a very, very tiny group of students, or do you really want to have a territorial, a regional impact? And so then you have to do some compromises. The second challenge is the one Julia also mentioned before. Our key functions of research, teaching, learning, and community services need to be intertwined much more closely, because as Francisco also mentioned, and I read it also in his chat here, this process of unlearning and relearning, we call it interaprendizaje. So it's a learning among, a learning between students, teachers, and community members. And this challenges your disciplinary training, and this challenges your traditional role as a teacher, because we don't need teachers in this traditional sense anymore. We need mediators. We need translators between different sources of knowledge, even linguistic, a linguistic kind of translator in that sense. And so this means that you cannot do teaching in an indigenous or an intercultural university without research. And you cannot do teaching without community service. So it's not, you can't distinguish them completely as the Western model does. Another challenge has to do, I think Francisco also mentioned it, has to do with the question of autonomy, university autonomy, academic freedom, because many Latin American universities insist since Cordoba 1918 on the conquest of autonomy, the defense of autonomy, thinking vis-a-vis a state actor, or thinking with reference to the church. But what about the indigenous peoples themselves? Is an intercultural university autonomous with regard to indigenous peoples? Or is it, on the contrary, bound to consultation bodies as the Consejo Social in the case of Aysén, and we call it the counseling Consejo Consultivo in the intercultural university? So then it's not autonomy any longer, but it's the need to find long-term commitments between academic actors, community actors, governmental, non-governmental ones. And we learned a lot from the Cauca experience in Colombia, where the Intercultural Indigenous University of Cauca signs long-term contracts. They call it proyectos de vida, like life projects, so that in the next 10 to 20 years, teaching, research, learning, and community service will prioritize these issues and not others. So myself as a teacher, I lose my academic autonomy because I'm compromised and I'm working together with an, in this case, with an indigenous organization. So these are some of the challenges. And as to the definition of university, Tristan, your last question, I think one change which will be necessary is to finally give up Western universities or conventional universities. We could call it methodological individualism. The idea, the false idea that we only teach students as individuals. I was once asked by a lady in southern Veracruz. She said, "You're so funny people. Why do you ask students? Why do you ask my son, my daughter to join the university? Why don't you ask our family, our community to join the university? Why is it also individualized? Why couldn't we admit as a university communities as partners in the educational process?" And this would redefine not only, of course, the access to university, not only the study programs, but of course also the ways of graduating from the university and the ways of long-term collaboration between universities and communities. Of course, this means that universities, in my context where I live, means they need to de-urbanize, they need to ruralize, they need to localize, they need to territorialize in the way Francisco also mentioned it. And this will not be the same process in any part of Mexico, of rural indigenous Mexico. It depends on the context. As Laura Rios already mentioned, due to the violence in certain contexts, in some regions, universities should be a partner of the communities which are hosting the university. But in other regions, they should not. They should work against the local context, a local context full of violence, of fragmentation, of anemia, or however you may call it. And so in some contexts, the university works as partner of the local communities, and in other contexts, the university needs to become a sanctuary against the local context, so that young people can do things inside the university they would never do outside of university. And so I think we need very different solutions in different parts of the country, in different parts of our continent, because the contexts are so distinct, so different. So we need a kind of inductive turn to any kind of university policy to let the university local actors to decide bottom up, which is the best solution in each case. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Gunther. Kelly, Gerardo, Udi.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just trying to, so many wonderful points have been made. I think I'm actually going to continue on from what Gunther was saying on, this, maybe start a little bit, I'm going to say a little bit about question 3 and then go back to question 2, but this kind of enrolling the community part of the university. And I mean, one of the aspects of, how even the idea or term Ecoversities came about is because the idea of a learning space, you can call the university, ecoversity, whatever, subversity, that it's coming from the actual home. And so it is enrolling the whole community as part of what it's organizing, what it's teaching. And for me personally, one of the most powerful aspects of the journey that Udi and I took that led to the kind of founding of Ecoversities, and since then is what it is what a university is at all. And hearing from the panelists and from others of us in this group is the importance of social movements as some of those spaces. I mean, I remember the first time I went into the Occupy movement tent city in London. I sat there and I was actually with a professor from a local university, but the way that person was talking, I was like, finally, I'm in a space where I'm actually learning. But then I'm thinking, but this person's from a university. Why isn't this person teaching this way within the university? So, which I think also speaks to the issues of boundaries. And so on the one hand, it's a celebration of, how we use that term. And Tristan, you said, should we just abandon it? Yes and no. I mean, it's radical to place that term because it's has so much historical importance and baggage at the same time on, within a learning space. But then at the same time, I see that becoming an empty signifier, because if you just place it all over the place, then that also becomes meaningless. So I think, and maybe that's a co-opting issue, how we use that term, how we apply it. I mean, I'm very interested in that. Is it something that can be, very localized, very short term? Should it be that expansive? And universities were started as a sanctuary and as a home, and they were completely more localized and community driven, and we've moved so far from that. But then at the same time, this is why we're here, and we're learning that even though it's moved so far from that, it's also coming back, and it's a multiplicity of ways of thinking, doing, and relating, and learning, and teaching in those spaces. Just to briefly address question 2, I mean, a lot has also been talked about there, but one key point that, I mean, at least Udi and I have found, especially over the past decade or so, when we've kind of been in and out of universities, we've worked in alternative, whatever that means, universities. And what we both experienced is that no matter how much change you want to do pedagogically, experientially, at the end of the day, institutional constructs or structures have to change. You can't have a hierarchical top-down system and change anything. And I mean, so maybe that also connects with what you were saying with co-optation. Like it doesn't really matter and so what we've done recently is we've established a worker-owned nonprofit. We've organized ourselves as a cooperative. And I did see that somebody mentioned in the chat about the cooperative model and how important that is. And I'm sure we're going to make a lot of mistakes. That's part of the learning process too. How do you organize something like this? How do you hold this space? One of our goals in creating this cooperative, which has come out of the Ecoversities Alliance because it's relational entirely, it's friends who want to keep working together, is we have our own space, but we can partner with different types of organizations, projects, and institutions, but we have this different mindset of a kind of non-hierarchical horizontal orientation to how we pay each other, how people are involved, what kind of skills we offer. And so at least it's a negotiation kind of a process, which I think is really key, because within these other higher education spaces, you don't have usually that option of negotiation. So I think that's really key in all of this. And I think finally, I just want to also challenge this idea of successful, because I know that's part of the question, what is successful? And I think that's also part of the unlearning. And that's been part of the Ecoversities process too, is when, we've been trying to understand, support, inquire about different cases. What is this? What is something that is successful? Is it just that it's ongoing? Is it that it's had moments of transformation? What does that actually mean? And so I just want to put that out there too, because I think part of the success is the failure of things and how things moved and shift. So I'll stop there because I want to give Gerardo and the rest of us a chance to talk more. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And building on that and talking about pushing the boundaries and how Ecoversities is an experience. First thing I have to say is that Universities is in itself a pluriverse. We're talking about an organization that has brought together over 200 different projects and 45 different countries, that speaks dozens of languages, that has been walking this path for almost 7 years. So it's really like the diversity of the approaches that it has is, I would say, almost infinite, and so it's impossible to reduce it to an explanation or a model. But and being also Ecoversities a platform of encounter, mainly, it is also a decentralized organization, and it is something that we have always fought for, in which this platform of encounter, because of this territorialized approach that sees the abundance of a planetary movement that is blossoming everywhere, and that takes very different forms. So we have accredited institutions like the ones we have mentioned here. In the chat, you mentioned UMA with Victoria, who has been part of the conference. Unitierra and Swaraj, which are completely de-institutionalized universities, are part of Ecoversities. But there's also a bunch of popular education projects, indigenous, peasant, Black, women-led projects, all with the different epistemologies. And some of them are formal or informal. Some of them are more temporary than others. But what we want to highlight is the potency of the encounter, and the potency of the smaller places, and the potency of people who find or reconnect with the joy of learning together and of exploring freedom and transformation and imagination and sensibility in a way that really feels enlivening. And so in this encounter of many epistemes and ontologies, then the Ecoversities become this space for cosmopolitical learning, which is the concept that we're suggesting. And also thinking about how this is not only a process of learning, but it's a process of being, it's a process of dwelling, it's a process of sentir pensar, as we say in America Latina, corazonar, turning the heart into a verb. And that involves way more than a combination of hands-on, theoretical, transformational, inner, outer work and learning, which involves radical questioning of the one world idea, that there's only one world or one explanation about this world, but that shows a commitment to the pluriverse, to this emergence of these other worlds that are possible, and that Ecoversities, in this questioning of this understanding of the one world that is so predominant in traditional universities, cultivates a special kind of political and ethical sensibility. And it is about this expansion of the sensibilities that can therefore make us thrive in a way that is anthropocentric in a way that relates to deep time, in a way that relates to the non-human, the more than human, the community of life, and that is always territorialized. We don't believe that there will be one way of doing this, of reclaiming these spaces, local spaces of learning. And these, so far, you know, with a lot of mistakes, with lots of failures, with some conflict, but also with lots of joy and very beautiful friendships that have emerged from this collaboration, research, publications, etc. So what we're trying to do, and this is building on also previous days of the conference, is really to challenge this idea of the community of competence and expertise that characterizes the university to really become a community of translators, of weavers, of poets, of people who can challenge the status quo and that can expand this work of being attuned to the dream of the earth, to this sensibility that yes, there's something that we need to do to change, to live the life and to coexist in a way that is more in line with the logic of life and the care for life, and that in this the potentiality of a space of exchange of different practices and ideas, it is very necessary, and that we're not the only one. That is also, there are similar networks all over the world, and that it is in this articulation, in this cosmopolitical learning, that we can hold and engage the creative frictions and the contradictions and the ethical collaborations that are needed for this flourishing being that we want to cultivate.
Thanks very much. That's brilliant, and I'll be quick with my bit so we can leave some time for others to speak. But yeah, Kelly, thanks for calling us out on successful. If I put best practices in there, I'd have really got you going, I think. Just a few words on the I'll say a little bit more maybe about the other question, but on the challenge, I think what's interesting about this is that the challenges faced when you're working inside the system are really different from the ones outside. And I think from having brushed up against different initiatives over the years, and I've seen, one of the things I've been interested in is this idea of the developmental university, and some of the national universities set up, you know, in the second half of the 20th century, really started off with quite a progressive agenda. And what you find with those is that it's the kind of the, and I think Gunther raised this earlier with talking about the accountability needed to various funding organizations. So the changing funders of the system end up restricting freedom a lot over different periods, and then even independently of the direct funding link, just a kind of a centripetal force that pulls these things back into the center. So even universities whose founding mission were very distinctive, and maybe even in their name and in their constitution, over the years gradually get pulled back. If you're inside a public system or a national system, it's very hard to maintain that distinctive identity and get pulled back and back and back. And then, you know, working outside the system, of course, you don't have those forces so much, but you know, the resources challenge and the recognition challenge, and unfortunately, you know, one of the biggest problems of mainstream education, the reliance on certification and diplomas, ends up making it very difficult for people to access forms which don't have it, because you're effectively opting out of most forms of employment if you're taking that as your main higher education choice. And of course that makes it very hard for people to take that leap. so yeah, just a few reflections on those challenges. But on the question of the university, so I really started thinking about this when I visited this tiny initiative, and I've no idea if it still exists. This was more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Something called the Universidad Abierta de Chile, the Open University of Chile, which was operating out of a basement in Santiago. And they were embroiled in a long-term legal battle with the Chilean government because they weren't allowed to use the term university because they didn't fulfill the legal requirements. And so I was asking, well, why do you bother if it's causing you this headache? And they said, well, we really want to battle over what it means to be a university. We don't want to use a different term, even though it would be a lot easier for us, because actually we want to try and fight on this battleground of the word. And I think that's a powerful argument. I like Stefan Collini's, it's not really a definition, but when he talks about a university, he uses it in this, what is the, what really distinguishes a university from other kinds of experiences is the search for human understanding through open-ended inquiry. And I really like this idea, and I think it's broad enough to include all of what we're doing, but not just anything at all. So it's not that any kind of, I mean, if we think of universities usually cater to adults and they build on previous learning, there are lots of descriptive things that we could say about what higher education is and what makes it different from other kinds of education in schools and so forth. It's usually specialized, it's usually in depth. There are lots of things like that we could point to, but it's not just anything, but open-ended inquiry for the development of human understanding can encompass so much that doesn't have our usual institutional trappings. So I like this idea as something which can give us something to hold on to, but is very inclusive of so many different institutional forms and things that are completely unrecognizable of what we think nowadays in terms of the physical spaces and the institutional structures of the university. And I think we perhaps it is a good idea to battle over the term and to create new institutions which are using this idea of a university, but in a what might be completely unrecognizable forms for the mainstream. Okay, let's open it up now. So I think we had a comment or two on the chat. So would anyone like to convert that into a comment, or are there others that would like to talk to the two questions that we've been looking at through the articles here, or any other points that people would like to make? We can open it up. Anyone like to contribute?
I just want to say thank you. I still believe that
sorry, Laura, I don't know if it's just me, but the sound is very, very blurred. I can't quite hear it.
So yeah, any comments could also be questions to any of the sessions or through your own experiences if you want to reflect on any of that. We have about 10 minutes before.
Can I go?
Yes, Madri, go.
Yeah, hi all of you. Thank you for this interesting discussion. My question is, were there any reflections that were covered from the lens of students or communities who come be part of such initiatives? What is happening with them after taking this derouting from the mainstream institutions, when they take this plunge and then they make this decision? What's happening to them in the real world? Are they able to really navigate themselves? And if yes, how many? If not, why not? Where are they stuck? That's my question.
What was the question?
Thanks, Madhuri. Tristan, shall we take a kind of plus and then put it out to people. So we're going to hold that question about what happens to students afterwards who've gone through this route outside mainstream education. Any other questions or comments? And then we'll just have a final round of anybody who wants to respond from the presenters.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just want to, I've been thinking about decentralizing university, but I'm thinking about decentralizing the self. I mean, here when somebody in this, when somebody receives something from a human being that wants to give something, the life of that person can change. And when the life of that person changes with hope, it affects the people around. And I don't know how to take out all this knowledge from these very small circles. And the only answer I can find is that we have, I don't know, I feel my activism is in my everyday life with people that is just besides me. Because I think sometimes I hear a lot of theory and a lot of things, but for me, it's, I don't know, when I see a guy that doesn't want to kill people and want to study, just because he hear a phrase, he didn't even went to the university, but he found a person who told him something and he changed his mind. And that is a big thing when someone doesn't need to be hired by an organization to kill somebody and wants to make something else.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Laura. Any other comments, questions, responses, reflections? So maybe people want to respond to either Laura or Madhuri from the presenter. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to quickly say that in terms of, outcomes after, I mean, I think it changes the whole question of, because I mean, I think, the main idea is if you go to university, you get the degrees, so then you can get a job thing. I mean, most of the alternative spaces I've come across are trying to rethink all of that. And so the way of learning is through apprenticeships, or it's through, which builds relationships, or it's through, thinking about and doing work in the local community that then can lead to some sort of livelihood. It's also rethinking what livelihood means. And so when that's being rethought as part of the learning process, then it completely changes everything about what the purpose of it is in the first place. So, and that's been one of the biggest learnings for us in with different learners / students, seekers we've encountered through getting to know different people who've chosen and who learn. I mean, Laura, you have a very good point. It's so one of the biggest issues is even learning that these places exist, and that's the case everywhere, because they're not publicized, they're not in the media, so it can be circumstance by chance. Just learning that you can even access, or this is even another possibility of how to make choices along your path at whatever age as well. But I think if it's looking at kind of senses of confidence, who am I, what how can I contribute to my community, how can I engage in a very different lifestyle where I and my community, my family feel empowered, or it changes the whole question in the first place alongside the answer and the possibility.
Gunther?
Yes, in the same sense, answering Madhuri's question, we are conducting a study comparing indigenous students graduating from different kinds of universities, technological ones, more conventional ones, indigenous, intercultural, community-run ones. And the key issue with regard to graduates coming from alternative universities, in our experience, is we have to somehow cut the short circuit this mental short circuit of believing that a university degree is related to a salary automatically. If we succeed in deconstructing this automatic short circuit, then the students and the graduates have a completely different horizon. Then they talk about empowering themselves as kind of literate peasants or family business communities, working with academic knowledge and community knowledge as well, but without identifying their successful future with a certain salary level in a certain external company or in a certain governmental organization. And I think in that sense, it's very important from the very beginning in alternative university initiatives to destroy or to deconstruct this false imaginary, which is a colonial imaginary, to think that a university degree leads you to socioeconomic upward mobility, which in many parts of the world is still wrong. It's a European fiction to think about this automatical mobility. And I think this is what we, from the very beginning, we somehow to counter in order to have successful graduates. I don't know if I could explain myself, but it's a bit complicated. And this leads me also to Laura's question or to Laura's comment. I think that we need, Francisco mentioned in the chat with somebody, I think with Renate, we think to concentrate very much on ourselves, de-learning and decolonizing identities, attitudes, hierarchies with regard to knowledge. I think if we do not succeed in decolonizing ourselves as academics, as teachers, then we will implicitly reproduce these hierarchies. And so I think it's related. Madhuri's commented question is very much related to this need for deconstructing and decolonizing the Western myth of university knowledge, university degrees, etc. Thanks.
I agree with what Kelly and what he just mentioned. What I'm questioning deeply is out of the reality is the dominant money system. So while we are preparing or while we are creating those nurturing communities and spaces where we are working towards increasing the capacity and confidence of the individuals to navigate themselves or to navigate their families and re-look into all the definitions of what is a livelihood and all of that. But I have an example. There was this child in an open learning community in India, and due to pandemic, he's around 13-year-old, and he lost his father suddenly. And now he has a responsibility. He has a younger sister. He has a responsibility. That's just doing him, like dawned on him all of a sudden when he was exploring, learning, building his skills and capacity. So this child, maybe in three years down the line, should start thinking about meeting the ends for the family. So, and yeah, questions like this make me question deeply, should I, if I aim to create such a community, then should I integrate the possibilities of both worlds, or should I still remain strong about the conviction that no, don't get into all the challenges that all of you are mentioning about having the name university or whatever. There's so many challenges that was just spoken about. Just not get into that and just focus on building the capacities of individuals and the communities. So I kind of go back and forth. I'm still trying to learn.
I'll very briefly respond to this discussion to Maduri that you raised, and Gunther and Kelly replied, and also just to be aware of the time that we're kind of at the, I think at the moment of the 2.5 hour. But one really important point that I think both Gunther and Kelly touched on is that, you know, rethinking decolonizing these conceptions of earnings and professionalism and all these kinds of things. I think one really exciting thing that many of these universities alternative are doing is, because they're so immersed in territory, in the community, in place, they're not in the typical way that you think about a knowledge institution which is separate from that, including the economy of that place too. So as part of learning through these places, there's also a transforming, a reconfiguring of the economic sphere, of engaging with issues of solidarity economy, different kind of going through it. It's also about connecting and weaving different relationships to a community that could sustain the community in different ways as well. And I think that's the exciting thing that I see in different parts of the world emerge. And I think that's one huge challenge when you think about, you know, the incredible economic powerhouse that is a university itself in terms of the people working in it too, you know, getting salaries and livelihoods and so forth. But a really important question to consider in this ecology of knowledges and ecology of alternative spaces is to think about the economic foundation of this, and to think about how do we reimagine economies that, again, the economies, the oikos, to be at the service of the larger oikos, the planetary, the home, the non-human, you know, and these kinds of questions. And I think for me, that's one of the key questions that these places of learning need to really engage with and inquire. So how do we think the economic foundation for livelihoods that are not destructive to our planetary home and to the other than human beings too, but that, you know, can work in a much more community concerted way as well.
We'll stay with that question. Yeah, thanks.
Tristan or Gunther, is it time to wrap up? What are you feeling? Is it 2.5 hours?
I think so.
You did it. You made it.
It's been great. Thank you very much, everyone. I've really enjoyed it. It's been fantastic contributions. Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for coming again, and keep coming to the events at the of the conference. And if you are also interested in participating in other kinds of events, just keep checking, at least from the Ecoversities Alliance perspective. These are the kinds of conversations that we're really excited to have and to further. But thank you all really very much from the bottom of our hearts here, and sending a lot of aloha, and have a great rest of the day for you all.